Right now, you are thinking you chose this video and press play. It felt like your choice. It felt deliberate, intentional, like you, the real thinking sovereign you, made that happen. But what if I told you that every single thing you have ever done in your entire life was inevitable? That from the moment that universe began, the chain of cause and effect had already sealed your fate. Every word you have ever spoken, every person you have ever loved, every decision you have ever made was already decided billions of years before you were even born. This isn't science fiction. This isn't about experiment. This is conclusion that some of the greatest philosophers, neuroscientists, and physicists in human history have arrived at independently across centuries. Free will, the idea that you are the ultimate author of your choices, almost certainly does not exist, and by the end of this video you might never look at yourself or anyone else the same way again. Let's get into it. Part 1. What do we even mean by free will? Before we dismantle free will, we need to understand what we are actually talking about, because the words get thrown around in a lot of directions. When philosophers talk about free will, they generally mean one specific thing: libertarian free will, not libertarian in political sense, but libertarian in philosophical sense. The idea is that you, a conscious agent, have the genuine ability to make choices that are not fully determined by the prior cause, that you could, in an identical situation with the identical brain chemistry and identical history, have chosen differently. This is the kind of free will most people instinctively believe in, the kind that makes moral responsibility feel real, the kind that makes you feel proud of your achievement and guilty about your mistakes, the kind that religion, law, culture, and almost entire human history is built upon. And this is exactly the kind of free will that falls apart under this serious scrutiny. There are three broad positions in this debate. Hard determinists say free will is completely impossible. Everything is caused by prior events, including your own choices. Compatibilities say free will or determinism can coexist, that free will just means acting without external coercion, not acting without cause. And libertarian free will is advocate says humans genuinely have some casual undetermined power to choose. Today we are making the case of hard determinism, or what we might call illusion about free will, the view that the subjective feeling of choosing freely is real, but the metaphysical reality behind is not. Part 2. The determinist case. Let's start with the oldest and the most powerful arguments against free will: determinism. The universe, as far as physics is concerned, operates according to laws. Every particle, every atom, every molecule follows rules. Cause produces effect, effect becomes cause. This chain is unbroken, uninterrupted, and crucially, it started long before you existed. Your brain is made of atoms. These atoms follow the laws of physics. The neurons that fires when you decide something are doing so because of your electrochemical gradients, synaptic connections, and prior neural states. All of these which are shaped by your genetics, your environment, and your entire history of experiences, none of which you choose. You did not choose your genes, you did not choose where you were born, you did not choose your parents, your language, your culture, your early childhood experiences, the very thing that fundamentally shaped the neural architecture doing all your deciding. So when you sit down and feel you're making a choice, what is actually happening? A biological machine, shaped entirely by force outside its control, is producing an output, and then the machine experiences the output and its own decision. This was articulated with stunning clarity by Baruch Spinoza in 17th century. Spinoza was one of the first modern philosophers to argue free will is simply an illusion born of ignorance. He wrote that human believes themselves to be free because they are conscious of their actions, but ignorant of their cause that determines those actions. Think about that. We feel free not because we are free, but because we cannot see the machinery running underneath. Spinoza's God, or a nature, as he often used interchangeably, was single, infinite substance in which everything was necessary. Nothing happened by accident, nothing happened by free choices. Everything, including every human thought and desire, followed necessarily from the nature of existence itself. Spinoza wasn't being dark about it. He thought understanding this truth would actually set you free from destructive emotion like guilt, envy, and hatred. But the philosophical conclusion was clear. Libertarian free will is incompatible with how the universe actually works. Then came Pierre-Simon Laplace in 19th century, who gave us the famous thought of experiment, a famous thought experiment now called Laplace demon. Imagine an intellect so powerful that it knows the position and velocity of every particle in this universe, and one moment at a time, using the laws of physics, that intellect could calculate with perfect precision every future events in this universe, including every decision human being would ever make. Nothing could be uncertain, nothing would be free. Now, Laplace demon have been complicated by quantum mechanics and chaos theory. We will get to that shortly, but the philosophical thrust remains devastating. If your brain is a physical system and physical systems are governed by physical choices, then your choices are in principle calculable outputs, not free creations. Part 3: Schopenhauer and the Will That Isn't Yours. Now let's bring in one of the most fascinating and underrated thinker in this subject, Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer agreed with Kant that the world as we perceive it, the world of object, time, space, and causality, is a kind of representation, a mental construction, but where Kant left open the possibility of nominal self that might be free, Schopenhauer took a darker turn. Schopenhauer took the darker turn. For Schopenhauer, underlying all those reality is what he called the free will, a blind, starving, unconscious force that drives all things, not a rational planner, not a loving God, but a mindless, hungry, relentless, impulsive. And you, your ego, your consciousness, your feeling of being self who chooses, is just one expression of that will. Here's the part that should unsettle you. Schopenhauer argued that you can do what you will, but you cannot will what you will. Read that again. You can act on your desires, but you cannot choose your desires. You want your drives, your deepest motivations. These arises in you, but you don't construct them. They appear seemingly from nowhere. But then your conscious mind waves a story around them to make it feel like you chose them. This is extraordinarily important because most people, when defending free will, say something like, "Of course I'm free. I act on my own desires, not someone else's." But Schopenhauer's response would be, whose desires? You didn't choose to want what you want. You didn't choose to value what you value. You didn't choose your temperament, your appetites, your fears, your loves. These were given to you by biology, by experience, by chances. But if your choices flow from the desire you never chose, in what sense are those choices truly free? Part 4: Nietzsche, dissolving the doer behind the deed. Now, let's begin with Friedrich Nietzsche, and this is where things get really interesting. Nietzsche is often misread as a champion of individual will and power. In a certain sense he is, but in a critique of free will, is actually devastating and radical, perhaps more radical than any of the thinkers before him. Nietzsche argued that the concept of free will was invented deliberately as a tool for moral control. In his work Twilight of the Idols on the geology of morality, he argued that the notion that people freely choose their actions and therefore fully responsible and punishable for them was not discovered by philosophers, it was constructed by institutions. especially religious ones, to justify blames, guilt, and punishment. But Nietzsche went even further philosophically. He attacked what he called the doer behind the deed. Our language, every language is the structure around subject and verb. I decide, she chose, he acted. The grammar forces us to imagine a ghost inside a machine, a little self sitting somewhere behind the C's, a little self sitting somewhere behind the I's, pulling levers and making things happen. Nietzsche said this is a grammatical fiction. Nietzsche said this is a grammatical fiction. There is no doer behind the deed. There is only the deed. The I that seems to be choosing itself is just another event in the causal chain, a sense of agency we feel in the mind, narrating a story after the fact and inserting itself as a hero. Consider how unsettling that is. The feeling of deciding, of weighing options and choosing, is not cause of your own actions. It may be a side effect, a narration, an epiphenomenon. The decision happened, and then your conscious mind claimed credit for it. Part 5. Neuroscience confirms the illusion. Here is where philosophy meets hard science, and the results are extraordinary. In 1983, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet conducted one of the most famous experiments in the history of conscious research. He asked subjects to flex their wrist whenever they felt like it, and to note the position of the clock hand at the moment they felt urge to move. Meanwhile, he measured the electrical activity in their brains. What he found out should have made headlines for decades. The brains showed measurable electric activity, a signal called the readiness potential, approximately 550 milliseconds before the subject moved. But subject reported becoming conscious. But subject reported become consciously aware of their decision to move only about 200 milliseconds before the actions. Think about what that means. The brain has already decided, already began to prepare the movement about a third of a second before the person was even aware of wanting to move. The conscious experience choosing came after the causal process had already been set in motion. Our consciousness is not a driver, it may be a passenger, or worse, a narrator watching events unfold and watching itself into the story as the author. Libet himself tried to soften the blow by suggesting that perhaps consciousness retained a veto power, a last momentum ability to abort the action, but subsequent research had undermined even this escape hatch. Later, studies had shown that even the apparent veto can be predicted from the brain activity before the subject reports feeling the impulse to stop. More recently, neuroscientist Sam Harris, who has written a short but a razor-sharp book titled Free Will, synthesized these findings into one of the most clearest modern arguments against free will. Harris points out that we don't know where our next thought is coming from. Right now, you have no idea what word minds will produce next. Thoughts arrives, intention arrives, desire arrives. None of them were chosen by some prior you, because that would require an infinite regress of choosers all the way back. Harris' argument is elegant and brutal. You are not the author of your own thoughts, and since your actions flow from your thoughts, you are not the author of your own action either. You are, in a very real sense, watching yourself from the inside. Even you don't know what you are. Part 6. What about quantum mechanics? Now, at this point, someone will bring up quantum mechanics. They say, but the universe isn't strictly deterministic. Quantum events are random. Particles don't have the definite state until they are measured. So maybe free will lives in the quantum randomness of brain. This is a genuine and important objection. Strict Newtonian determinism had been overturned. The universe is not perfect clockwise. There is a genuine indeterminacy at a quantum level. But here's the problem. Randomness is not freedom. If your decisions were being driven by some quantum fluctuation in your neurons, that wouldn't make you free. It would make you a victim of cosmic noise. A choice that happens randomly is not more yours than a choice that happened deterministically. It's less yours. Random means uncontrolled, unpredictable, uncaused. That's not what free will is supposed to be. Philosopher Galen Strawson captured this with his famous basic argument. First, you act from your character, value, and motivations. Second, to be truly responsible for your actions, you must be responsible for your character, values, and motivations. Third, to be responsible for those, you must have chosen them. Fourth, but any choice you made to shape your character was itself made from a prior character you didn't choose. Fifth, therefore, ultimately, moral responsibility for your own action is absolutely impossible. No matter how many steps back you go, you hit bedrock, a self you didn't existed, a self you didn't author. Quantum randomness doesn't solve this. It just adds chaos to this mix. Part 7. The compatibilist escape and why it's not enough. Now the most sophisticated defenders of free will are the compatibilist philosophers like Daniel Dennett, David Hume, and John Stuart Mill, who argued that the free will and determinism can peacefully coexist. Their argument goes like this: we don't need free will to mean uncaused caution. We just need it to mean that you act according to your own desire and reasoning, without external coercion. When someone puts a gun to your head, you are not free. When you choose your career based on your own values and deliberation, you are free, even if those values were shaped by prior cause. This is a perfect coherent position, and it's genuinely useful for thinking about law, morality, and human dignity. Dennett argues that the kind of free will worth wanting is exactly this: the ability to deliberate, respond to reasons, and act without compulsion. But here's the honest problem with the compatibilism: it changes the subject. When most people say that they believe in free will, they don't mean acting without a gun to your head. They mean something deeper. There is a real self, a genius agent who could have done otherwise. That they genuinely deserve credit for their success and blame for their failures in some ultimate sense. Compatibilism quietly drops that claim and replaces it with something much weaker. It saves the word free will by emptying it of its original meaning. And if that's what we are doing, if we are just redefining free will to mean action from your own desires, then fine. But we should be clear that the folk notion of free will, the one that undergirds our justice system, our moral institution, our sense of pride and guilt, that version does not serve scrutiny. Part 8. So what? Does this matter? Okay, so maybe free will does not exist. What we are supposed to do with that? Some people hear this argument and feel terrified. If nothing is free, does anything even matter? Are we just robots? Is morality meaningless? Should we just give up? No, and this is the most important part of this video. Understanding that free will is an illusion doesn't make life meaningless. It can actually make us more compassionate, more honest, and more rational. Think about how we treat other people when we believe. Think about how we treat other people when we believe they chose their circumstances. The homeless person chose to be lazy. The addict chose to destroy their life. The criminal chose to be evil. But if you genuinely internalize that every person is a product of genetics, environment, and upbringing, trauma, neurology, and chance, nothing will change, none of which they choose. You cannot look at another human being and feel contempt. You can actually feel that one thing that makes sense: understanding, and maybe compassion. Schopenhauer reached this conclusion too when he saw clearly that all human suffering flows from this striving, will that none of us choose. His ethics became centered on compassion, suffering as one of the genuine moral virtue, not judgment, not punishment, compassion. Nietzsche wanted us to go even further, to stop organizing our entire moral framework around blame and guilt, which he saw as a symptom of psychological weakness and resentment, and instead to create a new values oriented towards growth, affirmation, and becoming. Sam Harris argued that end of free will should reform their justice system. Punishment for its own sake, retribution became coherent if people couldn't truly have chosen otherwise. What remains rational is containment of the dangerous, rehabilitation of those who can be changed, and deterrence of future behavior. These are forward-looking goals that does not require the fiction of ultimate desert. And on a personal level, and this might be the most liberating thing of all, understanding the illusion of free will, understanding the illusion of free will can dissolve the neurotic guilt and shame most of us carry. You are not just self you are thinking you are. You are a process, a pattern, a river, not a stone. You are shaped by everything and you shape everything that comes after. Within that process, deliberation is real, growth is real, change is real, but the idea that you are fully sovereign and caused author of yourself, floating free of nature and history, this is the myth. And myth, however comforting, are not knowledge. Spinoza said we are not free, but that understanding necessity itself is a kind of liberation. Schopenhauer said the will drives us blindly, and that seeing it clearly lets us back from it. Nietzsche said that self is a fiction. Nietzsche said that self is a fiction that doesn't stop him from demanding that we became who we are. And neuroscience says your decisions were already in motion before you even made them. So maybe the question isn't whether we are free or whether free will exists.